I'm here in the Great Hall with General Ronald Rand, one of the generals we're honoring here in Quincy with the General's Bridge and General's Park. So welcome, General Rand, back to your hometown.
Thanks, Mayor. It's a pleasure and a privilege and an honor to be here.
Well, you're with quite an esteemed group. There's 18 generals since the Revolutionary War.
I look at those guys. I look at General Dunford and General Sullivan and General McConville and the rest of them, and all I can say is, in the words of Wayne's World, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy.
General Rand, you are worthy, and we're proud of your service. And you come from a great Quincy family.
I do.
We talk about some of the common themes between the generals, and they all talk about family. They all talk about growing up in this great city. And
well,
you're a family from the Point.
Yep. We started out a family from Snug Harbor.
No kidding.
In the projects, the housing projects down there. When I was a kid, came home from the hospital. We lived 1 year at a place on High Street, and then we outgrew that. I was the sixth kid in the family. We moved to a place down in the projects. We lived there until I was 10. Went to Snug Harbor Elementary School up until, I guess, the fifth grade, fourth or fifth grade. And then by the time we moved to the Point, when I was 10, there were 11 of us, plus my grandfather moved in with us. Wow. And then my brother Tom, the kid of all of us, was born while we lived at 49 Edison Park in the Point. But, you know, I'm sure my story's not a lot different from theirs. Family is what made us who we are and got us where we are. You know, I grew up in a house where there wasn't a lot of everything, but there was enough of everything. The one thing there was a lot of was love. You know, the parent and inspiration from both my mother and my father. I always said my father was the strength in the family and my mother was the glue that held the family together. Because when you have 12 kids and 8 of them are boys, and some of them are boys like this boy who was trying to experience the full measure of life, which meant I was getting in trouble a lot, and I wasn't the only one getting in trouble a lot. There was the yin and the yang of what's right and how far do you go in disciplining them and what's enough.
Yeah.
But Mom and Dad. So
you're one of those kids that pushed the limits.
I was one of the ones who pushed the limit? Oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Where was the hangout?
You know, you'll remember this, maybe a lot of people will, the quarries. Okay. We used to hang out at the quarries, and in fact, during the summertime, one of the things I remember about growing up was after school, we'd ride our bikes over the quarries and we'd swim. Yeah. You know, this was the era when you knew you had to be home when the streetlights came on, but you didn't have to report in all the time. We didn't all have cell phones. Nobody was tracking where you were. Your parents trusted that you were doing something reasonably safe and productive with your time, either playing basketball or I don't think my mom would have been thrilled to know we were up at the quarries diving off those rock ledges and God only knows into what kind of rocky pits, but fortunately me and my friends never really got hurt doing that.
There's a famous picture from the Life magazine cover of kids jumping in the Quincy quarries. Yeah.
In one of the quarries, I don't remember which one it was, they were all up by Quincy Avenue and on the hills up there.
Quarry Street.
Quarry Street.
Yes, yeah.
There was one of them that had a high point where a rock jutted out and it didn't quite clear the rocks below. So you had to take a run and jump to get off it and make sure you were going to clear the rocks. And it had a piece of bent iron in it, like it had been a construction site or something like that before. And it was bent, so that particular jump was called Hook. Hook was 71 feet above the water. So if you did Hook, you could go anywhere you wanted to. You only had to do it once, but because of the way kids are, we did it each time we went there at least once. But you had to clear the rocks below you, and you had to fall 71 feet till you hit the water. So,
I didn't have the intestinal fortitude to do the quarries when I was a kid. I stuck to Williston Beach.
You know, it's funny, you talk about family. My father and mother raised us in a way that we're all our best friends. My best friends in the world are still my brothers and sisters, the ones that are left. Now, I met some great people and have lifelong friends along the way that I met through my service in the Air Force. But still in all, when I want to hang out or when I want to think about or talk about or I feel bad about something, it's usually with my family that we're hanging out and doing that. And my mom and dad gave us a lot of gifts. That's probably the greatest gift they gave us.
Yeah, I tell you, I grew up, I was one of 8. My grandmother lived with us. Now, we didn't get to that number, but
Pretty close.
But we had a lot of cousins over all the time. It was always like chaos in the
Yeah,
house. It was
yeah.
never calm, I wouldn't have anything different. I thought it was terrific. It really was terrific.
My wife and I just moved out of a house in Bethesda to be closer to our daughter in Alexandria. We live in the same street as her now.
Nice.
She's 10 doors down. But speaking of chaos, 12 kids, 2 parents, and a grandfather in a house with 2 bathrooms. Bernie and Emily and I lived in a house that had 5 bathrooms and 2 half baths. And I keep thinking to myself, how in the world did we ever all get ready to go to school, get ready to go to church on Sunday, with only 2 bathrooms?
You did it, though.
You did it.
Somehow you
did
do it.
And it was chaos. It was chaos. We ate in shifts sometimes. We couldn't all fit around the dining room table, and it got to be we'd fight over to see who would get to sit in the kitchen, because you were out of view of the parents, so you could have a little more fun while you were eating.
Your mother's a saint, I'm sure.
My mother would sit at one end of the table, and my dad would sit at the other. I'm a lefty. Dottie and I are, of the 12 kids, 2 of us are lefties. So I always sat at the corner near my mom, because my left arm was not bumping in anyone, and Dottie sat next to me. My brother Al sat next to my mom on the other side, because she never finished her meal, and she would hand Al all her leftovers. So to the day she died, if they went out to eat at one of your restaurants here in Quincy, and she generally would order chicken parm, she'd eat 3 or 4 or 5 bites out of it and then hand it off to Al. So,
And Al gladly
and Al's the one who
accepted.
can carry it the most, because he works out all the time. He's very fit.
So I've been referring to you as a kid from the Point, but you got some Germantown roots. So when you got to the Point, where did you go, to Point Webster School, or where did you go to?
When I got to Point, I went to Daniel Webster Elementary for my 6th grade year, and then I got put into, in the 4th or 5th grade, I got put into some kind of Quincy advanced placement course school, which was good in some ways, but it meant you couldn't go to school where the kids you hung out with were going to school. So all my friends in the neighborhood and all around the school went from Daniel Webster to Point Junior High. And I went to Central Junior High. So I had to make a whole bunch of new friends at school and then have my other friends at the neighborhood. And I would get to school from the Point down to Central by riding my bike every day. They didn't bus us. You had to get there on your own. So I went to Central Junior High and then Quincy High. All 12 of us are Quincy High graduates. And for a while, there was probably if I graduated in '67, my brother Bob's 7 years older than me, so he graduated in '60. I would say from '60 until Mike graduated, there was at least one Rand at Quincy High School for about 16 years. Let's see, Mike was born in '56 and Bob was born in '42, and then, 16 or 18 years. There was at least one Rand kid in Quincy High School.
Well, when I went to North Quincy High, I had older siblings that had gone there. 2 of my older brothers were not held in high regard. So, are you Dick and Joe's brother?
I had the opposite. My oldest brother and my oldest sister were perfect kids. Still are.
Yeah.
Perfect kids. They did everything right. They got jobs. They got scholarships. They were smart. They got good grades. They did everything they were supposed to do. They did it on time. They were babysitters for we grew up, if you had a big family, you probably know this, but your mom can't keep track of you all, so at certain phase points along the way, you take care of each other. So Al and I were taking care of Doug, Russ, and Mike, who were all about 6, 7, 8 years younger than us at one point. Everyone took care of someone else. These two took care of everyone. So I'd go into a class, and somebody would say, "Are you Bob Rand's brother?" And I said, "I am. Yes, ma'am, I am." She'd say, "Well, are you as smart as he was?" And I'd say, don't go down that street. Let's not go down that street." So, but I loved Quincy High. I loved the friends that I made at Quincy High. I had a teacher at Quincy High, I don't even know if he's still around, named Bruce McDonald.
I've heard great things about him.
He was a guy who recognized in me something I didn't. He challenged me. He wouldn't let me goof off or pretend to not be smart or not be interested in learning. He challenged me, he pushed me, he taught me, mentored me. And at the end of the 10th grade, I thought, wow, that was rough, but it was good. But I'm glad I'm done with Mr. McDonald. And I came back after the summer to the 11th grade. It turned out he was my 11th grade English teacher. And I said, "Mr. McDonald," he said, "I'm not letting you out of my sight, Mr. Rand." So, and he was my teacher for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade in English. And besides my dad and maybe my brothers and my granddad, Mr. McDonald at Quincy High School teacher probably pushed me more in the direction and the path I ended up on than anyone else I met along the way, I bet.
We often talk to people, and I think we all can look back at that one or two special teachers along the way that really made a difference. And I know we still have an outstanding school system here, and it comes down to what happens in the classroom, that interaction,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's great to hear. Did you play any sports at Quincy High?
I played basketball. Our church was this church right across the street, Bethany Congregational Church. I was short and slow, so I didn't make the high school team, but I played all the way through church basketball, all the way in all the city leagues.
Sure.
I played soccer for the high school. I think that's about it sports-wise. We played all kinds of sports. We grew up playing football and hockey and baseball down at Pond Street. Do you know where Pond Street is?
Absolutely.
Pond Street was another short walk or short bike ride from where we lived, and it was the meeting place for all the kids in the neighborhood. And then after a while, they put a basketball court down there, and they had a big field so you could play football and baseball there any time of the year and kick the soccer ball around.
Well, if you drove by there today, it would look very different. There's a skate park there.
Really?
Yeah. Still a ball diamond, but a skate park.
I
and a
didn't go
basketball.
by it on the way here, so I'll go by it
Have
on
to
the
check
way
it
home.
out.
The quarries, Pond Street, on a bad day after school and you didn't have anything else to do, we'd all go hang out at the Thomas Crane Public Library and roam the bookshelves in there, and
How many times you get thrown out?
probably every time we went in. Except for my older brother and older sister, and then they all worked, that's one of the places they worked, so they try to, get us a little slack, but we were usually too noisy in there.
Beautiful building.
But Thomas Crane Public Library helped teach me my love of books. I love books, I love reading, and a lot of the times that I went into the Thomas Crane Public Library, I was in there and sometimes we're playing hide and seek, but while you're hiding, you're looking at the books in front of you and say, I think I want to read that book. That's how I discovered The Count of Monte Cristo in there one day. I found it, I was hiding behind a shelf that The Count of Monte Cristo was on, and so.
So you're a junior, you're a senior. Were you thinking military at that point?
My dad and mom, neither one of them got to go to college, but they both really prioritized education. And my whole life, the one drumbeat I would hear from my father, well, there were 3 or 4, boys don't hit girls, period. So you had 4 sisters, they could do anything, say anything they wanted to, you do anything, you couldn't respond. But the real drumbeat was, you're all gonna go to college. We didn't go, but you're all gonna go to college, one way or another. Now, he worked at the shipyard, and my mom stayed home for a while, and then she worked down at the Wollaston Credit Union. And so they made enough to put food on the table and a roof over our heads and give us clothes and everything we really needed, but they weren't going to be able to help too much with college. So I watched those 5 older than me work, get good grades, get scholarships, go to college the hard way. I said, I'm going to go the easy way. I'm going to join the military. I'm going to go to one of the academies and get a free 4-year education. So I went into 10th or 11th grade. I went into the guidance counselor, another guy whose name I remember, Mr. Haynes. I don't know if Mr. Haynes is alive or not, but his nickname among us students was the Big Cheese. He sort of acted like the Big Cheese. I said, hey, I want to apply to one of the academies. What's the process for doing that? And he laughed and he said, no way, you're not, get out of here, they're not gonna accept a kid like you. And I thought he was just being a jerk, but I figured out later on it was reverse psychology. It was him pushing me towards doing it. So I sent in applications to Annapolis and the Air Force Academy. And I applied. You had to be appointed. I think you still have to be appointed to go to the academy.
You have to get a recommendation.
You have to be, you have to be appointed by a congressman or a senator or the president or a Medal of Honor recipient. I think that might be the 4, at least when I went, those were the 4 categories. So we had I don't remember if he was a congressman or senator, Edmund Brooke?
Senator.
Senator, right?
Yes, yep.
Somehow I came up on his radar far enough that he appointed me to the Air Force Academy with one of his, senators had, I don't know why I remember this, senators had 5 appointments each in a given year, okay. Not to each academy, 5 appointments total. Yeah. Congressmen had 2 each. I might have that wrong, but I got one of Senator Brooks' appointments to the Air Force Academy. It got delayed, screwed up in the mail somewhere. So I hadn't heard anything from either academy. I applied for an Army ROTC scholarship and got a ride and got accepted to Bowdoin College in Maine. So it was a 4-year scholarship. It was going to pay everything, in return for which I would have served in the Army for 4 years. And so we graduated on a Thursday. The 15th of June. On Monday, the 19th of June, I started my job at the shipyard, courtesy of my dad. I was a chipper. Do you know what a chipper is?
I've heard that term, but refresh.
It's the nastiest, dirtiest job anyone ever invented anywhere. And if you're a high school kid on a summer job, you get the worst parts of it.
Of course.
So my job was to be, it's June, to be in the inside of the hulls of these ships, down in the bottom where the water and the rats and all that are, and you have a 8 or a 10-pound chisel and a 10-pound sledge, and you're chipping the rust off so that they can come in and sand it down and paint it so you don't rust out a hull. I learned 2 things. Rust is always over your head. It's never, you're never chipping down and away from you. You're chipping up, and this rust comes down, gets in your eyes and your ears and your hair, and it was miserable. It stunk, it was hot. It was hard work. I did my first day at the yard as a chipper, Monday, June 19th. Walked home with my dad. He walked to the yard every day. It was about a mile from where we lived in the Point. Okay. He'd walk there and then he'd walk home. And we came home, and I was too dirty to even go in the house to shower. We had a outdoor shower hooked up to a hose, and because of the rust all over me, he said, you jump in the shower before you go in the house. He was flipping through the mail. He said, you got something here from the Air Force Academy. And it was my acceptance notice.
Wow.
1 week before I was due there. I was due there on Monday, June 26th.
Wow.
So, because my dad had pulled a few strings to get me the job, I didn't want to just do a 1-day gig. So I worked my whole first week as chipper at the yard. And then I said sayonara and went off to the Air Force Academy.
Mom and Dad were proud of that, I assume.
Yeah. I mean, one of the jokes in the family is everyone will always, if you were to say to me, who was your mom's favorite kid, I'd say I was. But if you asked any of my other brothers and sisters, they'd say they were. Because
Sign of a good mom.
somehow they made us all feel like we were all their favorite kid. But they were inordinately proud. They both came to my graduation in June of '71. They both flew out to Colorado for that.
Did you take to it right away?
No, I was
just
the same kind of cadet that I was kid in high school for a while. I was always pushing the limits. I graduated probably with more demerits and disciplinary actions against him than anyone in the history of the academy. But somehow I made it through.
Yeah.
Somehow I graduated. Not very high in the order of merit, but still I graduated. And then your question was, did I take to it right away? It was a 4-year incubation process. But I knew by the time I graduated that I was in the right place and I was doing the right thing. And then when I went on active duty, there was no more. I mean, I've always kind of been a fun-loving guy. I'm going to have a good time. But I worked like a dog. I loved what I did in the Air Force. I always, I had a 5-year commitment for going to the academy. When I graduated, I always said, I'm going to get out in 5 years. And after my first assignment, which was in California, and my second assignment, which sent me over to Southeast Asia, I started answering the question, how long are you going to stay in, by saying, I'm going to stay in until I have a bad job or I go to a place I don't like or I have a boss I don't like. And 32 years later, I finally retired because I never had a job I didn't like, I didn't go to a place I didn't want to go to, and I didn't have a boss I didn't want to work for. So.
Who was your favorite place that you were stationed at?
There's a saying, maybe some of the other generals told you this, your favorite place, your favorite assignment, the one you just left and the one you're going to. But probably in the big scheme of things, where I grew up the most, learned the most about myself, grew as a military professional and as a communicator, was the 2 years we spent in the Philippines. Because we were under constant assault from a communist insurgency that was killing guys at the base and Mother Nature. We had a earthquake that destroyed the country that year. We had an eruption of a mountain, Mount Pinatubo, the largest eruption of the 20th century. That mountain was 7 miles from the house we lived in. Wow. It was just, but I learned a lot about what you can do, how you can grow, how you can help people in time of need. But I loved every assignment. I liked everywhere we were at. I was fortunate that my family got to go. They didn't get to go with me when I went to Southeast Asia. It's a funny thing. It's 32 years in the military. My very first deployment as a first lieutenant was to the jungles of Southeast Asia. And 30 years later, my last deployment as a general was to the desert of Southwest Asia. But in between, all those other great jobs, great assignments, my family got to go to most of them with us. If you ask my wife that question, she'd say the 2 years we spent in Hawaii was the favorite assignment, but.
Not a bad place to be.
Not a bad place to be.
And you got your own family now. I know you touched on it, but.
I met Bernie at my, let's see, when I came back from Southeast Asia, I went to a base in Ohio, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I met Bernie there, and we courted for a couple years, and we got married 3 years after I met her in '79. And then we have a daughter named Emily who was born in '86. Okay. Just the one daughter. The love and the light of my life, my wife and my daughter. They're the sun and the moon and everything in between. And when you're in the military, service is a choice for a guy like me in the military. But you don't get to stay in. It's a family vote. If your family doesn't support you and agree with you being gone all the time and separated or picking up and moving every 2 years, you're not going to last in the military. And Bernie and them went everywhere the Air Force asked me to go, tolerated every time I had to go without them. You know,
I don't think the average person understands that commitment, that sacrifice.
I
that
don't
people
think
make.
the average person understands the commitment a family makes and the sacrifice a family makes and the service that they provide. You know, my wife would host Thanksgiving dinners for the young enlisted guys on our base and in our unit who didn't have anywhere but the chow hall or the barracks to have Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas or things like that. And that's not unique. Everyone looks out for each other in the military in a way that I don't think I ever really saw as much of in the civilian world.
So you went through the academy, now you're now in service. Did you ever see yourself becoming a general in the Air Force?
No. I'm the last person, because of some of the other things I've shared with you, I'm the last person I thought. I was always very outspoken. You know, I learned probably most of that principle from my dad. You learned if you didn't want to know what my dad thought, you didn't ask him, because he was going to tell you what he thought, not what you wanted to hear.
You didn't have to ask my father, he'd tell you anyway.
I think my bosses appreciated along the way that they were going to get what I really thought, but I never in a million years thought that I would end up. My favorite rank was first lieutenant, because you have a little bit of responsibility and not really too much accountability. So you could do you could be in charge of people and do great things, but if you screwed up too bad, you were first lieutenant, so they weren't going to hammer you too bad. I never thought it would end up the way it did. You don't know how or why that works. Somebody somewhere sees something in you and recommends you get promoted to the next level. And, you know, promotion's a crapshoot anyhow, because you meet a board, you're meeting a board with everyone else in your service at the same time phase of your career and with the same background. I didn't have any below the zone promotions. I did end up the Air Force. I wouldn't have a master's degree except for the Air Force. The Air Force sent me on a program called AFIT to get a master's degree in mass communication. Guess where I got to go to school? Boston University.
No kidding.
I got to come back home. In fact, we rented a place down on, I think it might be called Faxon Commons.
Sure.
There's some, on Quincy Avenue, there's a big apartment complex there.
Correct, yeah.
Bernie and I rented a place there, so we were half a mile from my parents. And I would ride the T in every day to go to school at BU and get my degree. But no, I don't think I don't know of anybody either who will tell you they thought they'd be a general or they joined to be a general. You mostly join for whatever reason you join. I joined to go to college. But you get hooked by the concept of serving and by the patriotic flavor of the work that you're doing. You certainly don't stay because of the pay. You certainly don't stay because of the stability your family has. You know, my daughter, when she went to high school in Alexandria, when I moved back to the Pentagon for my final assignment, she was 15 and she was moving into her 11th new home.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And it's even worse for your wife, because I happen to, sort of by design, but I happen to not be around during most of the moves, because moving's hard. But Bernie would orchestrate the moves and make sure the stuff going in this room gets packed together. And
So she was the general at home.
she was the general at the house, yeah. I'm the lowest ranking guy in the house, by far. There's actually no rank in the house. It's just Bernie's the boss, M's the next boss, and I'm the doer. That's the way it works. So,
I understand that.
yeah.
Married for 31
And
years.
that might be how everyone's house is. And if it's not, it should be.
So as general, do you have a particular story, good or bad, or particular memory that stands out in your role as a general?
When I was a brand new general officer working for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, as the Air Force's Chief Public Affairs Officer, Chief Spokesman. One of the things I did every morning was scan the world to see what kind of news had occurred or was likely to occur that would affect his day in the Pentagon. In one day, I read about a T-33 trainer jet that crashed outside of a base in Indiana into a motel and had done a lot of damage, but no deaths were reported. So I was one of the only people on his staff that could go into his secretary and say, Donna, it's the chief in, I need to see him. Donna knew from the chief that if Rand came in and said he needs to see me, I need to see him. So I came in, the chief was a big guy, big Irish guy, Mike Ryan. He had a stand-up desk because he had a little bit of a bad back. He was working at a stand-up desk and he'd say, yep, what is it? And I said, bad news, bad news. General Ryan's response was, is anybody dead? I turned around and walked out. I said, no. And General Ryan taught me that day the level of what real bad news is. Is anybody dead? I've learned so many good lessons from these guys along the way, but when he said to me, is anybody dead? I can tell you one more. I was working with, again, as a public affairs officer, we were going to do a briefing down in the DOD briefing room one day, and General Peter Pace, Marine Corps, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was going to be the guy who was going to be making this announcement with me and my Air Force Chief of Staff. So I went down to pre-brief General Pace on what the main points were, what we were expecting him to say and do. And he has this big, giant office down on the 3rd floor on the E-ring of the Pentagon. And his secretary brought me in, and he was on the phone, and he said, 1 minute. And I'm a habitual snoop, so instead of standing at the door waiting for him, I went over to his bookcase and looked at what books he has on his shelf, and I went and looked at his desk. He's got a desk about 10 feet wide and 10 feet long and about 4 feet wide, and he had one picture on it. One picture that size of a young Marine. And when he hung up the phone, he said, General Rand, how are you? I'm Pete Pace. I said, sir, I'm Ron Rand. It's nice to be working with you. I got a question for you. Before anything, I said, who's the picture? Is that your son? He said, no. That's the first Marine I ever lost in combat. I keep it there to remind me of how important the work I do is every single day. Those two stories, they have nothing to do with me except lessons people taught me about how you strive to be a good general officer and how you think about other people before you think about yourself. So.
Well, the dedication date for the bridge in the park is 9/11, the 20th anniversary. Do you have any particular memories of 9/11?
I was in the Pentagon on 9/11. We had just had a change of command in Air Force leadership. The guy I told you about, Mike Ryan, had just retired and turned over command of the Air Force to another 4-star general named Johnny Jumper, John P. Jumper. And we were all down, him and his immediate senior staff, about 25 of us, are all down in what they call the council room in the basement of the Pentagon, where I think even if we got hit with a nuke, that room, those rooms down below the ground would survive. He was explaining, as all new leaders do, how he worked, what his expectations were, what the road ahead was going to look like for all of us. And all of a sudden, a young staff sergeant came out from behind the counter and stood next to General Jumper. Didn't say anything, just stood next to him. General Jumper senses him and after 2 or 3 looks says, yes, Sergeant, can I help you? He said, sir, there's something going on in New York that I think you should see. Said, okay, put it on the screen. And this was a room that was surrounded by big screens. So he puts it on the screen and the one tower is smoking, and while we're watching it, another plane flies into the other tower. General Jumper says, all right, we all know what's going on here. Everybody meeting's over, go take care of business. So I go back up to my office, you know, it's the hub of communications. I'm on the 4th floor in the D ring, looking out at the side where the plane was just about to hit our building. So I'm trying to find out where the leaders of my media relations team are, community relations, what people are doing out at the bases and the major commands. Phone rings and it's my wife. I said, "Hi, honey, I'm kind of busy right now." She said, "Have you seen what's going on in New York?" I said, "Yeah, that's why we're so busy." And at that moment, the plane hit the building, hit our building. The fireball goes up outside my window, the lights flicker and go off, the building shakes, and I say, "Uh-oh, gotta go now, we just got hit," and hung up the phone. Think about leaving your wife with a, "Uh-oh, we just got hit," and hang up the phone. Not, "Don't worry, I'm okay. Just gotta go, we just got hit." I'm still paying for that. We had to evacuate the building, of course, and they wanted everyone, it's something like 25,000 people work in that building, 23, something like. They wanted everyone away from the building in case another plane was coming. They thought there might be a second plane like there was in New York. And there was another plane in the air at the time, missing and not reporting. And they had already scrambled F-16s out of the guard base across the river at Bolling Air Force Base. And they were flying over DC to protect against a plane coming in, another plane maybe at the White House or the Congress, anywhere. And then a truck came down the street and they said, "We're looking for 50 volunteers to go in and help us carry people out of the Pentagon." So I jumped up and got to be one of those 50 guys to go back in through the smoke and fumes, flames, and try and get people out of there. But the heat was too intense. We probably carried 8 or 10 people out. For ambulances, we were using, anyone who had an SUV was told to go to the parking lot, get their car, come back to the river entrance, and we put them in the backs of these cars, and they'd send them off.
So that was before the fire and some of the other emergency vehicles showed up.
Yeah. So, spent the day waiting to see what would happen. I remember going into the building at about 2:30 in the afternoon because when I left, I wasn't a cell phone or BlackBerry guy back then. I had them. Chief expected you to have them all the time. I never carried them or used them. So I left the building without any communications. I'm supposed to be in a command post with the secretary and the chief of staff. No one knows where I am. I'm in the middle of the building, supposedly helping carry wounded people out. So I went all the way back up to my office. I found a towel out by the door. I dipped it in a bucket of water, wrapped it around my face, walked back up to my office, picked up the landline on my desk, and called Quincy, called my mom. 617-479-0310. I bet you know your family's home phone number. That's been our number ever since we moved to the Point in '59. So no matter where you go, no matter what they torture me, I'm never going to forget that number, I don't think. Said, "Hey, I'm okay. Tell everyone I don't have any way to communicate." My mom was hugely relieved because the cell phone networks were all overloaded that day anyhow. So I picked up my phone and my BlackBerry and went back outside, but what I remember is the blue sky when we went outside of that building, and what a beautiful blue sky there was on that September day, spoiled by this really acrid, dark black, huge billowing clouds of smoke coming out of the Pentagon. But what I also remember is the Pentagon is a grand old dame in terms of construction. Where those two buildings in New York melted and collapsed, they wounded one part of the Pentagon where the plane hit. They didn't do any damage to the rest of the Pentagon. It's a 1939 WPA project. And here's the best part of that whole story. When they decided to fix the Pentagon, if you've ever been to DC and you come down or up 395 towards the district, the Pentagon's the first thing you see as you come towards the Potomac River. It's on your left. And the side that they hit was the first thing you see as you come up the highway. Because the guys flying that terrorist plane, which wasn't a terrorist plane, but they followed 395 as their guide to get to the Pentagon. The very first thing they did when they were reconstructing the Pentagon was put a false facade on the side of that building, so that in matter of only a couple of months, as you were coming up the highway, you couldn't see, it didn't look like the Pentagon had ever been touched. I thought that was a brilliant stroke, whose ever idea was that. Yeah, and then, you know, if anyone ever needed their commitment to serve and protect renewed, that day was the day that we all got a sanity check and said, are you ready to do whatever it takes? And then a year later, I was deploying to Southwest Asia.
Well, General, you're a great American. You're one of the modern-day patriots, as I talk about these generals, because it's you look at the history of this city going back to the Revolutionary time. You talk about the Adamses, the Hancocks, and the Quincy's, and today it's the Rands and the McConvilles and the Dunfords carrying on that tradition. So I'm so grateful you took the time out to spend some time here and share a little bit of your story, and thank you for your service to our great nation.
Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for what you and all the people in Quincy are doing with this. You know, this remembrance of military service, this honoring of military service, it's a great tradition in any city. But to know that in my city, my mom and dad's name is going to be remembered with a whole lot of other names as people who were patriots and proud of where they're from, and proud to say Quincy no matter where you go. You know, when you go out of Quincy, people try to make you say Quincy. And you always have to say no. That might be how you say it in Illinois or wherever you're from. That's not how we say it in Massachusetts. We're from Quincy. So what you're doing is a great honor. I'm humbled, and as I told you, not worthy to be with these guys you're honoring, but I really appreciate it, and I thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you, General.